Welcome back. I see most of you filled up the coffee pot. Yeah, my father has a saying. He says that Christians can be divided into two, in charismatics and coffeesmatics. Some of us, we need coffee to get energized, especially at this hour. I hate teaching at the university at this hour because it's after lunch, and it's that attention span that is very short. Well, this is the sixth session together. So thank you all of you for staying with us. We thank God for every speaker, every session, every one of you. And I could start by saying that one day an Irishman, an Englishman, and an American met. And you may think I'm going to tell you a joke, but no, I'm not. Actually, I'm so excited that this afternoon we have with us three brothers with us. They are very consecrated. I mean, they consecrated all their lives to God's mission of making disciples. And this session is different than the others because it's all dedicated to open discussion. So please, after the introductions, just bombard our speakers with your questions. Yeah, type them in the chat. If the questions are targeting one of them, please put the name of the speaker in a parenthesis. And then we want to end with a time of prayer for one another. All these sessions went so fast, so much content, we could not fit into 1 hour. But today we would like to end 10 minutes before and use those last 10 minutes to break out in small groups and to pray for one another. Okay, I want to start by asking each one of our speakers to share a little bit about themselves, just 2 or 3 minutes each. What has the Lord called you to do? And one encouraging experience that you had lately in your ministry. We have someone who's in his 30s, one who's in his 40s, and one who's in his 50s. So we have a big audience, I hope. Yeah. Okay, Jay, would you like to start?
I was just about to defer to the younger guys and go there first, but sure. My name is Jay Mosser. I'm a pastor in the United States by the Seattle area, about an hour south of Seattle, Washington. I am, as you've heard, 58 years old. I've been in ministry for 39 years. I was first hired as a youth pastor when I was 19. I spent about 20 years primarily with youth ministry, and then took on this role here as a senior pastor 19 years ago. So my context has been all local church. My wife and I have been married right about 38 years. We have 3 daughters, 2 by birth, and one who joined us when she was 16, came to us through a youth ministry contact. There's a story there. All 3 of our daughters are married. Each of them have 1 child. So I'm a grandpa for 3 times in the last year. It's been quite a change for me. So that's a bit about me and the context that I've been involved in ministry. Having 3 grandchildren in a year is pretty life-changing. I'll use that as the kind of the cool thing in my life right now.
I'll go next. My name's Rick. I think I might be the younger one, perhaps, certainly in my 30s. I live just outside Belfast here in Ireland, and I work for a denomination. So I work for the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. I've been, so my role is a denomination role. I work in a network of churches, of around 500 churches, and I work in the area of discipleship development. So it's quite a lot of delivering training, developing resources for disciple making, trying to cast a bit of a broad vision across the denomination, but also at times getting to to work alongside individual churches as well. I'm married to Sarah, she's a teacher, and we've 2 little boys, Noah and Micah. They're 7 and 2. So I would say we've both been enduring and enjoying lockdown over the past 10 weeks. It's been both a blessing and quite a lot of fun as well. And challenging too. And then I'm an elder in a local church here as well. I come from a background of youth ministry too. Actually, I spent about a decade in youth ministry before transitioning to this role as well. And I think you said a little bit about your ministry and your vision, Emanuel. I think probably Ephesians 4:12 has been key for me to equip the saints for works of ministry. And so that is probably a bit of a life or a ministry verse for me, to be an equipper of others. I want to be an equipper of others, and that's my mindset. And someone challenged me a few years ago when I really entered this new role, and they said, they challenged me and said, Rick, do you want to be a hero with 1,000 followers, or do you want to be a mentor to 1,000 heroes? And that's kind of been the emphasis of how can I be, I guess, mentoring or equipping others for them to get on with the work of making disciples in their local contexts as well. So we've done that in a variety of ways. I won't bore you with all the details, but it's training networks and tools and resources that we're producing to put into people's hands as well. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Wonderful. We will open to questions after Mike introduced, so you can already type your questions in the chat box. Well, welcome, Mike, too.
Yes, thank you. I'm very flattered that you think I'm in my 40s. That's tremendous. You've made my day. I'm actually 58. I'm the same age as James. So that's,
oh, wow.
That's great.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for your testimony in the plenary. It was really inspiring about the prayer life.
The prayer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're learning. We're somewhat overwhelmed with it at the moment. The last meeting we had somewhere between 6,500 and 10,000 people all praying from 42 countries. So we're somewhat taken aback at what seems to be happening and having to learn very fast. But that's probably the thing to share that's encouraging at the moment. So yeah, I'm based on the east coast of the UK. So my wife and I, we have been married 35, well, I'm going to get in trouble now, 35 years, I think, something like that. We've got one son and one granddaughter, who's 2. So I can understand what Jay says. It's a life-changing thing when you get to, they're great. You can have all the fun with them and then hand them back. It's tremendous. So grandchildren are great. So that's been good. My wife and I were involved in planting a church here in our hometown, probably about nearly 40 years ago now. And from that early beginning, we then planted lots of other churches and been involved in adopting other churches into our family of churches, which originally was just one name called New Frontiers, which is a global family of churches. But we're now, New Frontiers is now transitioned, which in itself is an example of discipleship, as Terry Virgo, who used to lead New Frontiers, instead of looking for a successor to hand over the whole thing to, he entrusted the future of the churches into hands of spiritual sons who he said, well, you now go and establish your own families of churches. So although we're still, it's a bit like if you have a daughter and she gets married, her maiden name would be, you know, the name she grew up with, but her married name changes. But the family identity is still maintained. So the family of churches I lead now is called Relational Mission, but we're still part of our family. Our maiden name is New Frontiers. So that's now, there's about 25 families of churches now around the world that came out of the one family, New Frontiers. So Terry gave a good example of discipleship himself and how he transitioned when he got to his late 70s.
Thank you. Thank you. There are lots of questions already in the chat, and some of them have to do with replication. So Mike, when we arrive at this topic, I would like to ask you to respond, because it seems that you replicated not just making disciples, but planting churches. Okay. The first question, what is one thing that inspires you or keeps you going in your ministry of discipling? We will go with short questions and short answers. And I think this one goes to all three of you.
I'll give a short answer to that short question. This is a bit unfair, I suppose, because it reflects my age. But one thing that encourages me in ministry is 3 John 4. I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. And when there are evident results, I've never seen 100%, if I may say, but when there are evident results, when the truth connects and someone follows Christ and goes on to live a life as a disciple, follower of Jesus, there's nothing better than that. That inspires me tremendously. So 3 John 4 is a key thing for me, keeping me going.
Wonderful.
I'll probably answer quickly just to say the multiplication factor, I think, is something that both encourages me, inspires me, and kind of keeps me going as well, because when you begin to see kind of a group that you've discipled then going on to lead others, or to step into leadership in the church or in other spheres of society, that's a huge encouragement, and it makes you realize it's worthwhile. Like, in some ways, ministry goes beyond you then as well. And maybe as well, when I see churches that I've worked with, creating methods or models and structures of discipleship, changing a culture or reshaping a culture, that's a huge encouragement as well. So I suppose fruit in some ways. As well.
Yeah, I think I'm wired, for some reason. I'm wired in a way that I get energized by seeing people become all that they could be. So that gives me more energy than even doing it myself. So if I can play a part in helping find someone with some God-given kind of calling and help nurture that calling and see them, even if they go on beyond me and do more than I've done, I'm thrilled with that. So I actually gain energy from giving away responsibility. Wonderful. Which I hope is not abdication, but
yeah. Larry Anderson shared with the man yesterday, saying that the hardest thing for him was managing disappointments. And one way in the ministry, and one way he did it was when he saw one fruit that gave him passion and recharged him to go forward. So thank you so much. What will you say are the three or the key marks of a discipler? Disciple maker.
Here in Ireland, we have lots of different definitions or thoughts of what discipleship actually is. So we have had to almost put words in front of discipleship to try to define it better for people. And I don't necessarily like doing that, but it's been important to do that. So certainly 2 words that we have been using a lot are intentional and relational. And to try to emphasize to people that discipleship isn't just a program or a product, but actually it's a personal process, I guess, that you walk through with people. So we've used that relational word, relationship. So relationship is one. Intentional, someone who is really aiming to see disciples made and to pursue Christ and to pursue others as well in that. And maybe the 3rd word I would just add in is faithful, because I think it begins with us. It flows out of us. And people often talk about what are the resources for discipleship. We are, we are a resource for disciple making. So actually, a lot of what we say or what we do will flow out of who we are as well. So intentional, relational, and faithful.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Difficult to put it into 3 words, isn't it? I suppose I would probably, if I had to do that, I would probably say family, because I think God's church essentially is family, not organisation. So the culture of family is where everything is, it's the atmosphere. I would say proximity that's appropriate to the stage of the person that you're inputting, and there's various ways you can manage different proximities at different times. I think proximity matters. And then process. I'm always interested, like Paul said to the Corinthians, that is why there are disputes among you, so that it becomes obvious where the grace of God rests. And sometimes discipling is about keeping your hands off a situation where you're observing how someone handles themselves and conducts themselves and how they navigate a difficulty, rather than stepping in all the time with just trying to solve people's problems, tell them what to do. So I think the process, knowing when to step in, when to keep back, is quite key. Getting that.
Thank you.
I would include patient under the idea of faithful, as Rick said. I also would like the word relational. I think that's critical. I think in my life, especially in my years of youth ministry, talk about material I used. I think I did more substantive discipleship playing the board game Risk all night with high school boys than about any other program I used. You could turn a 3-hour game into 6 hours, but it was because it was relational. And in the middle of the night, you talk about things you wouldn't talk about other places. So relational, and that's a comment on material, by the way. Board games are great. And realistic is another word that I would use. Realistic. I don't want to be shockable. A teenager tells me something, I don't want to say, oh, for goodness sakes, this is a real problem. There's nothing new under the sun. Realistic. And also realistic in the sense that I know that if I'm working with, let's say, 12 guys, one of them may be a Judas. So even among Jesus' 12, they weren't all going to go on to be faithful disciples. So realistic is good too.
Thank you. And do you find yourself wanting to win all the board games, or?
You know what's interesting? Yeah, no, I'm a competitive person, but I would try to tell myself going in, remind myself, what's a win look like? Yeah. And if we could go from a board game into real life, then this is a win. And may I say, one of those guys that I sat with as a 9th grader is now on staff with JV, Josiah Venture there in Europe. And he's attending ELF this year. And he and I go back 30 years, and it started when he was a young man playing Risk at my house.
Wonderful. Another question, do you find discipleship difficult? If yes, what's the most difficult for you personally, and what helps you go through?
Well, I could just say one thing. I've found that as the scale of what you're involved in increases, there's still only one of you. And so the challenge is how to appropriately position yourself so you give the appropriate amount of time and input to the people who you're wanting to disciple. So for me, I've learned what I think is quite a helpful technique for me, where I think about what I call orbits. So if I imagine myself at the fixed point here, I have like a short orbit, and they may be people who I see every week, and maybe even every day, or people I'm in very close proximity with, and I'm putting most of my effort into those people. Then I have a medium orbit, and I put names of people in there who I might have a Zoom call, I don't know, bi-monthly or monthly. It's a less frequent proximity to me. And then I have a long orbit, which might be people who I think about twice a year if I go on a ministry trip with them or come to a conference or something. And now people can change orbit. You can have someone in a different orbit according to what's right for them. But what it's helped me to do is manage my diary and manage my time so that I've got the appropriate people in proximity to me. Because what I found was happening was if I treated everybody the same, nobody got anything worth having in terms of time or cohesion. And I was becoming stressed and then always playing catch up. And then I don't think I'm really serving anybody very well. So I've had to sort of orbit the people who I'm working with, and that's helped me. That was the biggest stress.
Thank you. Any suggestions of study materials do you use? So some resources. Some of our speakers presented some during the week, but if you have something special that you find especially helpful, maybe in a particular age or context. Many of our participants are working with students.
So, again, it's a difficult question because it depends on what you're trying to do with the people. So I tend to break down discipleship into 3 categories. So there's classroom, there's apprenticeship, and there's immersion. And so it depends what you're doing with each person. Classroom is more course-based, but apprenticeship is more watch what I do and let me do that with you, and then we'll go and do it together and learn as we're doing. It's less material-based.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I write some of these things, but they're for a particular context or audience. So I see Rob in the group here. He's part of our denomination. So if I was having a conversation with him, I might direct him to some of those things, but in a different context, I might not. I actually think sometimes the best resources, or people talk about curriculum, I sometimes think the best is the ones that you could build yourself and create yourself. And so, I think of groups that I've worked with where I've just said, let's read this book, let's read this book together over the next 8 to 10 weeks and let's meet up for breakfast once a week and talk about it. So you read a chapter, I'll read the chapter, and let's discuss it. And then, later on, then let's gather and play board games and share our stories, or let's meet around food and share what God's doing in our lives, or let's read through a book of the Bible, or let's use this resource. And I think actually flexibility is really good in that. So I don't tend to stick really tightly to a set curriculum or routine, but I think it's good to build your own depending on what you want to see. We have created a set of resources in Ireland called Proximity, so it's interesting that Mike used that word, but and in some ways they're meant to be like a mini library of resources that people choose, and there's different themes. So if you want to disciple people on mission, or if you want to disciple them around spiritual disciplines and habits, then those are all there for people. But I think pick and choose, build your own, mix and match. That would be something like that.
I would agree. I think that the pursuit of the right study material is kind of a perpetual thing. And I know that there's some stuff out there that's for any age that's better or worse, but I'm over it on terms of study material. I think so much of it depends on the heart of the discipler. You can use the worst material out there and be redemptive if you are connected with Jesus and love people. So I think this is too simplistic. Grab something and go. Quit looking for the perfect stuff, man. It doesn't exist. If you spend 6 months trying to find the best stuff in the world, you're going to be sitting in the same place in 6 months. So get busy, grab something and go. It's all got flaws. So get over it and do something.
That's very good.
Thank you. And I think it's the danger also for us to stick with the curriculum and then we stop growing, we stop studying, because I know that book. Next week I'll meet with this group. I know that lesson, I know that verses, but creating, a Bible study, we study this book. It forces me as a leader to study and to prepare and to grow. Yeah, thank you. How do you get disciples to replicate the process with others?
I'll just kick off with one very simple thought on that. I think it's very important to, or it's helpful, it can be helpful to state the intention. So if you're gathering a group because you want them to go on and disciple others, I think it's sometimes helpful to gather them and tell them that at the start. So, this is part of the purpose. I'm meeting with you because I want to model this to you over the next X, number of months or years, and put that in from the start, a clear intention. I'm always struck by when Jesus said, "Come follow me." He didn't list all the benefits. Come follow me, and here's all the things you're going to get or receive. It was, come follow me and I will make you, or I will change you, transform you to become a fisher of men. So Jesus was really good at putting putting what he wanted to see at the end, right there as part of the invitation as well. So if you want those you are discipling to replicate a similar process with others, then let them know.
And right after Jesus said, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men," he took them out and they got started. He showed them how. And I think that's critical too. I can think back to, again, specifically time in youth ministry, teenagers. It was a big part of my life to say, "Come with me. Let's work with this other age. Let's work with younger kids. Let's go on a mission trip. Let's go to another country." We did a few things with Native American First Nations up in Canada, number of trips down to Mexico, some Indian reserves here in the Western US. Come with me, and I'll show you how. I don't want to just tell you to do it. I want you to see how it works. Join me in the mission.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Paul said, you know what I've taught among you, but he said also, you know my ways in Christ. And so you want people to copy your ways. And if they see that your ways are reproducing ministry, then, it's entrust to faithful people who will then, and able people who will then entrust to others. So they catch the DNA of it rather than do it as a job. Culture is more important than style.
Mm-hmm.
So if people catch the culture, then they might replicate it in a different style for you, that's fine. But they'll understand the culture of how you've lived and try to replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Here's a question that is more pressing now with COVID-19 lockdown. Do you meet also digital, or does it take away the personal touch, or wise lessons for this time of social distancing?
Well, I can perhaps start as most. I was leading a local church for many years where physical proximity is weakened. You're amongst people. Now I'm leading a family of churches. We are geographically dispersed, and yet my role is still to disciple and help nurture leaders. So I have to rely on digital means to supplement what I do in person. You cannot build relationship online, but you can sustain relationship online. And so we would try to mix the two, and simply because of limited time, you have to just use a mixture of both. I think online provision at the moment is a providence of God. I think it really is. And I'm sure if Paul was around, he'd be on it just as much as he wrote letters. So I think used wisely, it's a great facility for us to. The globe has suddenly shrunk in an amazing way.
Well, a very sensitive question. When it comes to discipleship, should older people adjust more to younger generation, or younger adjust more to older?
I think I would say that it might need an older generation to go first. I think there's adjustments for both, but I would want an older, well, let's say a more mature believer to realize that is part of what goes with their maturing in faith. Actually what comes with that is a necessity to pass that on to younger generations. I think in Malachi 4, I think, towards the end of Malachi anyway, this verse about, in fact, it's some of the last words of the whole of the Old Testament. And it talks about God turning the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of their children to their fathers. I think we need that, certainly in our context in the church. I think here we need that. I would use the picture. I often hear an older generation tell me that they can't. So in youth ministry, I spent years telling a younger generation that they could be used by God. I feel like now in my role, I'm telling an older generation that they can be still used by God in the lives of a younger generation. And I think older generations assume that they are not useful to a younger generation because they're not cool enough, or they're not relevant enough. And, I watch my retired dad, who is in his late 60s, on his hands and knees with a 6-year-old, playing trains with a 6-year-old. It's his grandson, my son. And, and I think to myself when I see that, what generation gap? Where is the generation barrier there? But it takes him to go first. It takes him to humble himself. He's a well-educated man. He probably wants to have other conversations, and yet he humbles himself by putting himself on his hands and knees with a 6-year-old to play with trains. So I suppose I would ask an older generation, how can we do that? How can we humble ourselves? But I think there is adjustments to both, for sure.
Thank you. Sorry for going a bit faster because the number of questions is bigger and the time goes. How does a regular meeting with your disciples look like? Just lay out what would be a wise structure of the time with them.
If I could simplify this beyond maybe what's helpful, I'll try. I begin basically every meeting by saying, how are you? Tell me about your life, and I'll tell you about mine. I don't ever just start by saying, okay, take your whatever book it is and let's jump into chapter 12. I always want to say, how are you? What's going on in your life? How's your wife and kids, or whatever fits the age bracket? What's going on in school? Did you ever get that dog? So personal, I want to talk about that. I want to tell about my life. Then if there's whatever content is there for the day, I want to go there. But I don't like to have that just be a one-way conversation. We're doing this together. I've got so much to learn from anybody I meet with or groups that I meet with. I have as much to learn from them as they have to learn from me. So I like a dialogical approach, relational approach. And then, of course, I just think it's important to pray together. So, that's pretty simple. But those are pretty key things in my life.
Nothing to add to that.
Please, Mike.
I don't think I've got anything to add to that. It's difficult to answer that question in a succinct way, but I think
Thank you.
The others have said
yep. Thank you. Well, another interesting question: how to deal with stubborn, rebellious kids from rich families? How to get close to them? And I guess some of their parents are quite influential in the church. How do you reach out to these kids?
I'm going to lower the flag on this one. I'm going to surrender it to the other two guys because I'm thinking of a situation I stepped into as a new youth pastor in a church where there were a number of those who were not, they were kind of the hub of the current youth group, but they were not spiritually sensitive. And I saw some other kids who were not from wealthy families, who weren't I don't know, as good looking or successful as a teenager. And they had a heart for Christ. And I shifted the focus of that youth group to them, to the shock of the people that viewed themselves as the main hub. The other kids got my attention, and I began building with them because they had a heart for Christ. I went there, and actually in about a 2-year period of time, the youth group turned around and they saw that I wasn't chasing them because they were from rich families and successful. I was pursuing the people who had a heart for Christ. And some of those kids, the rich and famous ones, said, how can I be part of that? So I don't like, I'd rather go with the spiritually sensitive ones, even if they're not wealthy and skilled and all of that. So I don't know. One of the other guys may have a better answer on what do you do with these stubborn ones.
I've got nothing to add to that. It's good.
I think if you take out the wealthy word, I think I was this until the age of 16 or 17. When I was a youth pastor, my lens or my focus for these folks was keep them involved, keep them connected, keep until an age of maturity, perhaps, or an age where they can, so I don't necessarily have an idea for the first part of the question, but in terms of how to have a huge impact on them, I think everyone's different. But that would be some of my keep them connected and don't lose them too quickly.
Thank you. As my wife says, fasten your seatbelt until they land down to a more maturity, and you can speak into their lives. Yeah. Lasse, there are many definitions on discipleship, as Rick said. What elements do you think should be in a discipleship definition? The key words of discipleship.
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but I think I'd refer back to something I said a little while ago, where I tend to think of classroom, apprenticeship, and immersion. So I'm looking for those three elements. I don't know if that's what the question is meaning.
I don't think we could hear Mike well.
Oh, okay. Let me try. See if there's a...
Can you type them in the chat, or the three words?
Yeah, I can try and do that. It's is that any better volume-wise?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I go for classroom, apprenticeship. I'm probably not spelling that right. And then immersion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for those three elements to be in every discipleship context. So classroom, you learn theory. Apprenticeship, you're learning by working in a situation. Immersion is when you're thrown in the deep end. If you want to learn Spanish, we'll move to Spain. It's about putting you in the environment where you really then have to sink or swim. And all three of those, I think, are necessary for a thorough discipleship process.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Rick or Jake?
I think in a denominational context, we've probably been pushed towards, you need a definition, you need to define what you're talking about for people. And what we've landed on is much more pictures, so rather than words. So I think people can pick and choose between words and sentences, but so pictures that I use to define discipleship, I use for us it's in our country, it's the picture of an L plate on a car, so the picture of a learner to define what a disciple is. They're a mathetes, they're a student. I use the picture of apprenticeship, of someone coming alongside a master, I guess, and learning a trade. They do that through classroom, but they do it mostly actually through the apprenticeship model that Mike was talking about there. So they do by watching and learning and having a go themselves. And I talk about a journey or about walking with people. So discipleship is walking, a journey of faith and as well. So for me, those pictures are much more, have been much easier, I think, to share.
Thank you. A question from a person who works in a Latin country. How important is it for group members to show up consistently? How to overcome this issue of irregular attendance?
I think it's important for you or us to show up consistently. And I think as well, whenever we are inviting people into a discipling context or relationship, I think it's good to define a regular routine that will work for everyone. So we might be placed, I'm struck by Jesus saying, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I have some concerns that our discipleship programs and processes sometimes place yokes and burdens on people that actually Jesus isn't really asking them to carry. So weekly, by all means, brilliant. It'll be regular and it'll be routine, but only if that works for people. I know if someone was seeking to disciple me right now in my life and they wanted a weekly routine, I would have to think long and hard about that and do some juggling, So yeah, I just think we need to think about that at the start as well. Don't know if that helps.
I would add too, I think you've got to have some measure of understanding for young people because their schedules are not always completely their own. Many times it's parents who are their ride to get someplace, or parents who are saying to their kids, no, school events or sports events, that's your ticket to college. So not every young person completely owns their schedule. So we have to give consideration to that.
I've sometimes found it helpful to agree tasks and agree time limits with people so they actually set their own deadlines. So I might say to someone, not because I particularly think they need to do it, but I just want to test whether they're going to do it. So I'll say, I don't know, can you read this book or this chapter by the next time we meet? When do you think you can do that by? Then you get that person to agree what they think they can do. So if when you meet up and they haven't done it, then that would be for me a time I'd say, well, we did agree that you were going to do this. So I won't do anything more beyond that at the moment. So when do you think you can actually read this by next time? And then set that. Usually they don't miss twice because they'll see that we're not going anywhere until we've actually done what they've agreed to. So I'm not imposing something. I think that's the key thing. It's not about imposition. It's about mutual agreement, right? You agreed you were going to do this. You've not done what you said you were going to do, rather than you've not done what I told you to do. So it's about responsibility as part of the discipleship process.
Thank you so much. The time flies. One last question with one phrase response. How to remain faithful and persevere through all the difficulties that come in discipleship process over a long haul, as you say. I mean, you've been 40 years, 20 years in the ministry. How to build this resilience?
Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey. Have fun. Make it fun. If it's not fun, don't do it.
If it's suffering on the journey? Well,
then you can still learn to rejoice and give thanks in all circumstances. Friends together on the journey gets you through the difficult times. It doesn't mean you don't have any difficulties, but it's a learning how to enjoy the journey. And I think discipleship is about helping others. It's about brothers and sisters together learning how to do the journey of life together and enjoy that journey. Even Amen. Through great pain, trials, difficulties, setbacks, sufferings, which we all get, it's still possible to enjoy the journey rather than to endure it.
Thank you.
I also like to keep my eye on the finish line, the smile of Christ. I used to be a distance runner. I don't know why, but I did. So you've got to enjoy running. There's the journey. But there's something really special about knowing that at the end of that race, there is rest and there's joy and there's camaraderie and we did it. So I keep my eye on the finish line too. Christ. I think Christ along the way, Christ at the finish line too.
Amen.
I'll maybe attack the question from a slightly different way and think about actually that as we model and teach, that actually I think we need to emphasize that there is a challenge and there is a cost and there is going to be difficulty and you're going to need perseverance for the journey. I think again, from my previous youth ministry background, I saw lots of young people who were once strong in their faith, some of whom fall away or drift away. when hardship or difficulty comes. And so I think we need to emphasize following Jesus doesn't make us immune from difficulty. I've been struck recently, Matthew 7, the wise and foolish builders, the storm came to both. And so the storm came to the wise man who built his house on the rock. And it wasn't that because he had been faithful to Jesus, the storm didn't come. It was that when the storm came, his foundation was still strong and his house was able to stand. And so I think we need to actually teach and prepare disciples for this and then model that in our lives. So how do I remain faithful and persevere? Because I've persevered through some small difficulties in my life, that has built discipline and taught me discipline that then has been more helpful when some harder difficulties come. So I'm a distance runner like Jay too. So I love that analogy, and actually you train hard to prepare yourself, and you embrace actually the hurt in a hard training session. You embrace it because you know it's preparing you. So I think there's something about, embracing difficulty. So right now, the current difficulties in our culture and society, actually, are we trying to stay, shield ourselves from the difficulties, or are we actually facing up to the difficulties and trying to learn through those as well, because they will teach us about perseverance in the kingdom of God in the long term.
Amen. Wow. Thank you so much. It was so profound, and we appreciate so much your time. Let's use the last 10 minutes to spend time in prayer together. We will break out into the rooms. Take first 2 minutes to share one another what to pray for, and then use the last time to pray for one another. And Lord willing, see you tomorrow on our last day. God bless to you all.